Good morning. During the week I was reading part of the Sermon on the Mount, and amongst the many things that Jesus teaches there's a whole section on the law. And the interesting part there, one of the phrases that caught my attention was Jesus says, "Until the purpose of the law is achieved." Which means that the law, in spite of the great fervour that the religious leaders of Israel certainly had, the law is not an end in itself. It's to serve a purpose, and the purpose is to promote life. And the Gospels take a strong effort, a long effort to try and affirm that Jesus, as a very good Jew, also observed all the mandates of the law. But when you come to Jesus' practice, we find a man very free before the law. He's a man who is able to discern with clarity when and when not the law applies. He says himself, the law was made for man. Man was not made for the law. And we see that in many of his practices. We have the lovely ones in the synagogue on the Sabbath, when Jesus, in one case, cures a man with a withered hand. In the other case, he cures a woman who has curvature of the spine. And he puts that value ahead of the value of observing the law, because what he did was against the law. But he returned life, he returned dignity to those two people. And that was a priority for him. We see that likewise when the woman taken in adultery is dragged before him. And again, Jesus doesn't condemn the woman, but says at the end, "No, I don't condemn you either. Go in peace and sin no more." But by the law, she should have been stoned. But Jesus prioritizes life. And we see that also when Jesus is with lepers. The number of times that Jesus touches lepers to heal them. And again to restore them to life. That they can go back into their families, into their villages, and can take on normal work again. And if Jesus is like that, then we have a model, I think, today in Francis. And Francis, following Jesus, has that freedom and intuition before the law. We have the beautiful one where Francis, coming back from Brazil, says, "Who am I to judge if someone has a homosexual orientation?" Even though the law might say something different. Or the very night he was nominated Pope, and before coming out onto the balcony, he says to the fussies in the Vatican, "I'm not going to wear pretty red shoes or a red cape lined in ermine. Just give me a stole." And the other ones were Francis in his first encyclical says rather straightly, he said, "Holy Communion is not a reward for a life well lived, but it is a promise of a better life to those who are struggling." And that's very, very different from what canon law, liturgical law tells us. But he has that beautiful freedom. And the other one would be Holy Thursday, where Francis washed the feet of some women. And amongst those women was a Muslim woman. And Francis washed their feet. Now the rubrics said it could only be men. But Francis could see these were prisoners, children, and this was a beautiful gesture of service that had priority over the letter of the law. And so we have Francis teaching us, following Jesus, teaching us that the law is at the service of life. And then we have Francis, just like Jesus, meeting such strong opposition from the religious establishment of his time. There is so much opposition to Francis, I believe, because of his freedom vis-a-vis the law and tradition. And I believe that Francis is following very closely the practice and the teaching of Jesus. And as regards the law, I'll share you one little story. My own experience. Many years ago, I was driving from Shepparton to Bendigo. And on the way, I was up behind Heathcote. And the land is flat. It's excellent cropping land. And the roads are straight. And the country is pretty much devoid of trees. And I came to a crossroad. And there was a traffic light. And as I drew near, the traffic light turned red. So I stopped. And then I started to look to the left, and down that road I could see about, I'd say 3 kilometres. There was not a car. To the right, no car there either. Nothing. And straight ahead, perfectly free. And the same behind. I was the only car, the only person in sight. But because the light was red, I stopped. And I stayed there until it turned green, and then I just burst out laughing at the ludicrous situation that I put myself in. So what I want to say today is that when we are confronted with a law, or when we have the option of observing a law, evaluate it. If it serves life, then it applies. And if it hinders life, in that circumstance, it doesn't apply. That seems to me the practice of Jesus, and it seems to me the practice now of Francis. Thank you.